So all that being said, people might have issues with like a third of our population going off to Mars and then the other third going off to the moon. And for one, I think that takes care of a huge amount of the overpopulation problem here, just because with all the baby boomers, and then eventually I think my generation and the one right before me is a pretty big boom too. We're not really called that, but if you were to take all those amount of population off, just doing, if we were to make it this way and it would work out this way, you would only a third of the people, only 2 billion people would be left on Earth, and then there'd be 2 billion people on Mars, and there'd be 2 billion people on the moon, and that's obviously that's a lot of people on the moon, but if we were to stabilize our populations, that's how it would end up being. And hopefully they can use minerals and soils from the planets themselves, hopefully to grow. The only thing we really have to provide is maybe some oxygen, or hopefully we could get stuff like that maybe from asteroids or from the planet itself, maybe comets with water and stuff like that. But like I said, people would have a problem probably doing that just because they would leave their family, their kids, and their careers and stuff like that. And I'm gonna try to put this out there, but for one, with my Spacegate system, travel between the planets would be very easy. A person that had spent a few years on Mars or the moon might not necessarily want to go back to Earth themselves, just because it would probably cripple them just setting foot on, just because all the gravity. But their children or grandchildren, anybody could go visit them whenever they wanted, go back and forth as long as they didn't stay there for too long. And as long as they exercised and stuff like that while they were out there, they're didn't let anything degenerate or anything like that, then that would be fine. I mean, people could still go visit you. Especially, I don't think anyone realizes how efficient the Spacegate system can really be. And not only that, but if you were, let's say, a teacher or some sort of account manager, so anything that you can do via like Skype or any sort of video, and they're coming out with hologram programming now and all sorts of things. A dual purpose to my Spacegate system is basically they could act as a huge satellite network, relaying data. So not only would they relay mass or, people, materials, whatever wanted to transfer between planets or anything like that, but they could also be relay stations for signals. So let's say you are a professor and you have an online course, there's no reason why you can't keep up with that on another planet. Or if you're a researcher or something like that, usually people in the research field, well, I'm not saying they're old, but in some fields, people are a little bit older. So it just kind of makes sense that, not makes sense, but they can continue their research, they can continue their work, hopefully with advances in conferencing technology and stuff like that, then it shouldn't be a problem. And even if we really needed to boil down to it, you could always have like a surrogate type of thing where you just communicate with and transfer your consciousness over to a robot over here or something. I don't know. I'm not really a fan of that. I'm more of a fan of the familiars, but obviously I made the chapter, but that's just my view. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different ways you can get around that. I mean, they can visit you, you could have the telecommunications, and then you could have maybe a surrogate type of thing or a remote controlled robot, something like that, that could function on Earth just as same as you would function there, except that you wouldn't have to deal with the gravity. So there's that. And the next part of the chapter that I would like to get into is, it's not an invention, and it's not even a development or anything. It's really just an idea of something that would aid in the colonization of another planet or any type of long-term space travel or anything like that. People would wonder, okay, well, I wonder this. You probably might not have thought about, or you might not. I'm not saying that you wouldn't have thought of that, but our main power source now is fossil fuels. And unfortunately, if you were to have a colony on another planet limited to just these super city spheres, oxygen would be a pretty big priority, and burning something to make energy would basically be completely out of the question. There's just, on a large scale with that many people out there, you just wouldn't do it. It just doesn't make any sense. So we really need to find something to power our devices and give our energy needs that we need for having a colony out there. So, in my opinion, the only really viable source of energy, besides nuclear power, and because there's only so much uranium, is solar power. And some people will be like, okay, well, Mars is a little bit further than the Earth from the sun, so wouldn't the solar power be a little bit weaker? And yes, that would technically be the case, except for the atmosphere on the Earth blocks out a lot of the solar radiation. So without that atmosphere on Mars, you get a lot more direct energy. That's a bonus. I'm not sure how much it would cancel out with the distance. I'm pretty sure at the very least you should get about the exact same amount, if not more, solar energy on the surface of Mars than you actually would feel on the planet. I'm not 100% about that, so don't quote me on that, but solar power. And since you're on a colony, and a lot of space shows and a lot of other things, and even our technology today with our space shuttles, they have what's called the CO2 scrubbers, and the same thing like in our submarines and stuff like that. I'm not really a big fan of a scrubber system, only because I believe that there's a perfectly viable natural way to cleanse the oxygen or the CO2 and turn it into oxygen, and that's plants. That's how we get oxygen on Earth, and that's how we maintain it. I don't know if you know this, but since we wouldn't be able to raise livestock or anything like that on these other planets just because of the lowered gravity, then we would have a higher amount of plant concentrations in our supercity farms and stuff like that. Hopefully that should take care of our CO2 output, just because the sheer amount of food that you would need to produce and the space that you need to produce, people will be like, oh, well, will we even have enough plants to be able to filter out all the CO2 and stuff like that? We really should, just because one person takes up like, I don't know, like 20 something acres of plants just to feed that one person for a year or something like that, some crazy figure. And it's not like you can grow the amount of food to feed yourself in your room, is basically what I'm saying. So you would need a sizable amount of food growing area. Along those lines, I think it would be very interesting and fun and a very good project for us to work on once we really get serious about space colonization, to really try to make it, once we get out there, not do it here, just because I wouldn't want to contaminate anything just in case we really messed it up, trying to genetically engineer a plant to create a voltage. That might sound kind of weird, but animals in nature produce a voltage. The eels, and not all eels, but there is an eel species that does that. And a couple of the deep sea life create a type of voltage just to defend themselves and stuff like that. So if anything, we could possibly try, because plants themselves use solar energy to create the energy for themselves, you know, that through photosynthesis, that's how they create the energy for them to grow. So I don't see it being a huge, well, it would be a very huge leap, but it's not all completely out of the question in my opinion. It could be. I'm just really reaching at this point, just for fun. I think it'd be cool. But to create, like I said, this plant that is basically like a solar power plant in a plant, and you can grow them in rows and hook them up like in series or something like that, and you have this huge, like, basically battery bank of all these solar power cells in these plants that you created. And I guess one of the ways that we can do that is maybe trying to figure out what in the DNA of the eels and the other species that enables them to create that voltage, try to maybe mimic it in the plants, and then obviously we'd have to hook up to them somehow, so maybe try to encourage their evolution in such a way that they would have something like a defensive mechanism to attack a predator or something like that if they try to eat like their fruit or something like that, and it would shock them, right? So it's not really too out of the question. I mean, Venus flytraps close, and there's those like tube things that just have digestion fluid in them, and they're meat-eating plants, so it's not all out of the question that we'd be able to make something like that. And not only that, but if we were able to design a plant like this that would basically be like a solar power plant, then we might also be able to encourage it to bear fruit. So not only would we get our electrical power from this plant that we could grow in however many numbers that we wanted to, obviously, but we'd also possibly be able to get it to bear fruit, so it would provide us with food. And not only that, but it would be cleansing the CO2 and turning it into oxygen for us. With the Super Cities chapters, I know you might remember me discussing how we would reclaim all of our solid waste products, you know, biological waste that goes in the toilet and everything like that, and turn that into fertilizer. So it would just be this perfect, not like perfect, but in my opinion, I think it's very beautiful that we would be able to create this cycle where our wastes would fertilize and help that grow with the sun, and then it would clean the oxygen, and it would just be this all-inclusive plant that we would wholly be able to depend on. And I really think that would enable us to create a sustainable colony on another planet like that. A lot of people might wonder, like, why don't we just ship oxygen over to Mars? Why don't we just ship oxygen over to the moon? And try to terraform it. And well, one of the reasons why we just can't do that is because Mars does not have a magnetic field. If it does, or it could have one, it's just a very, very much weaker than the magnetic field here on Earth. That has to do with a lot of different factors. As far as I know, our magnetic field is created basically because it's a liquid metal core that we have that's just constantly like rotating and spinning, and just that friction, that movement just creates this huge magnetic field. The reason why our core of our Earth is so hot is, as far as I know I said that already, but it's radioactive decay from other materials, and as well as just the sheer amount of gravity pressing in on it just creates heat. You know, the more pressure, more heat. It's just a thing like that. And when you go over to Mars, that heat and that pressure just isn't enough to create that magnetic field, and that's why it wouldn't be able to sustain an atmosphere even if we tried. We would basically have to make Mars bigger. That would probably be the only way that we'd be able to do that. So we'd have to take a whole bunch of asteroids from the asteroid belt and slam them into Mars, and hopefully it didn't explode and it just got bigger, and then maybe that would. But then the surface would be molten for years and years and years, and we're gonna. So anyway, that's why my colonies would be better, because the spheres would be able to protect us from the solar radiation. There'd be self-contained oxygen. You wouldn't really have to worry about anything like that. Another thing I think would be really cool, a lot of people here have really, really big problems with, let's say, the Yucca Mountain nuclear storage facility, and nuclear power plants create waste, obviously, a lot less than other type of non-green energy, obviously, type of power plant, but there's still something that you really need to do with those materials, and it's very difficult to store them just because they're so radioactive. It's very difficult to work with them because they're so radioactive, but Mars and the moon, I think, would be a very good place to put these things if, obviously, we kept it far enough from our colonies, and we used robotic and remote controlled means to maybe try to recycle them. Basically try to extract all the remaining uranium from it so that we can like recycle that uranium, and then the rest of the byproducts could be used for like long distance satellites, just because they still give off all that thermal energy that can be used. Like I think our rover is powered off of like a thermonuclear type of thermocouple device, which I think is just brilliant, beautiful technology. Is just, anyway, gives me a brain boner. So yeah, there's a couple things we can do, and that's a couple things that I'd like to share with you. So I hope you enjoyed this chapter. I hope you're looking forward to living on Mars and living on the moon and not having to have so many aches and pains. So if you like this video, like, subscribe, share the video. Please comment if you have any constructive criticism, anything like that, any other ideas you want to add to it. I will hopefully try to respond to it in a commentary video that would be added to the end of these videos. So thanks again, and see you later.